At center, 5 feet 9.5 before osteoporosis set in. From the University of Iowa, Admiral William Stubblefield.
When did you come up with those, Rob?
Just last night. That's why I sent the text out for your heights, please, in your school of choice. Batting leadoff, as previously introduced, Mr. Joseph Joey Torts for ready.
Man, how do I follow that? Okay, fellas, I think it's pretty clear what legislative issues are going to be coming up on the horizon when our esteemed delegates and senators go to Charleston. And one of those issues is going to be, wait for it, PEIA. The PEIA Finance Board recently reported out that they are $113 million short, and they got to find the money somewhere. So their report includes how to find that money, and it's going to come out of public employees' pockets. 14% increase for employee premiums if you're a teacher. 16% if you're a local government employee. You're going to be paying more for your premiums. 12% if you're a retiree. There's going to be increased deductible amounts by as much as 40%. A surcharge will be increased. Usually I think it's around $117. It's going to go up to over $300 if you want your spouse included under the PEIA coverage. And higher copays for outpatient services, drugs, and ER services. So you can hear the wailing and gnashing of teeth right now coming from teachers and public employees about what's facing them coming down the line. Dale Lee was quoted as saying that he agrees that employees should have skin in the game, but with these kind of proposals, we're going to be skinning them alive. So I guess the question this morning is, what is the legislature to do? What are their options to deal with this, given that we have had a history, past 6 years, according to the governor, wanting to freeze PEIA premiums for state employees? Well, the birds are coming home to roost. There's a lot of money owed, and it's got to come from somewhere. So what is the legislature to do is my question this morning.
Let's start with the legislator, Delegate Michael Height.
Well, I agree with what you say, that the birds are coming home to roost. It was a huge mistake to freeze the premiums for 6 years. A huge mistake. When it was originally set up, there was an 80-20 split. The state pays 80, the employee pays 20. Now, premiums go up for all of us. We all have insurance. A majority of us have insurance, private insurance, and every year premiums go up. We know that happens in the real world. Why we froze it for state employees and PEIA, I have no idea. Because now is when we have to face those issues. The crisis has set in. And not just now, over the past 2 or 3 years we've had to face this. The legislature has had to deal with this every session for the past couple of years. And it's one of the reasons I say that if you can find it in the phone book, government needs to get out of it. We don't do things well. We don't do hospitals well. We don't do insurance well. We finally privatized the unemployment system a few years back, and look at it now. We were underwater with it. And once we privatized it, it improved drastically. This is why we need to get out of insurance altogether. It's a political football every single year. If we would just privatize it, and the state still has to pay their 80% share, but then you can't manipulate things because it's privatized, then you don't have all these issues all the time. That's what the legislature needs to do.
I don't know enough about the state's current surplus level, but I kept hearing that we had this gigundo surplus, like $1 billion. Last I checked, 113 is a relatively small fraction of $1 billion. So why don't they just pay it? Because the other side of this, keeping jacking up the premiums for everybody in a state where employees are not paid very well in these jobs, is going to lead to even more departures from the border counties to the other states. All of the states around us pay better. Even Kentucky pay teachers better. So
That was their state slogan, by the way, for a while. It was working.
and it's a choice you can make in a way of, just slowly easing the pain upward on the employees, or it's a choice you can make to say, we got to start keeping these students who've gone to Shepherd and other state universities to get their teaching degrees. We got to keep them here. And we got to do something to stop them from looking every week at the other salary across the highway or across, 20 miles as it is here. So at some point, we can't, I agree that we can't just kick the can down the road. We do have to pay the bill. But the question of jacking up the premiums for everybody who's already not making a competitive wage is going to be a no gain for this state.
Michael Carl.
Well, I agree with all the criticism and comments that have been made so far, but I have just a couple questions to better understand how this happened. When did this freeze take, and was it legislative or administrative?
Mike?
It was administrative.
It was administrative.
Through the governor, yes. Yes.
Through a current governor.
Yes, that's correct.
I think Mike never asks a question he doesn't know the answer to.
Yes, Governor
You mean the
Justice
candidate for
Frozen.
Republican, the candidate for Senate?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's the one.
Well, that says it all.
William?
Yeah. The legislators, though, every time they have fixed the problem, they advertise, well, we finally got this monkey off our back. The problem is fixed. Only to find out a year down the road, it resurfaces and there is a major deficit. Mike Hike makes a good point. What should we get involved with as government? What should we fund? If we do decide to pull out a PEIA, then hopefully there's going to be a significant salary increase for the teachers and the state workers, because one of the bargains that we always hear that why we have reduced salaries is that because we're providing a supplemented insurance policy to them. So if we do pull out, then hopefully there will be a comparable amount of money going in for teacher salary. But regardless, it's got to be fixed, and we need to get away from this problem or the slogan that we hear every couple so years. We finally fixed it. We'll take care of it. It's history behind it, and then only within a blink of an eye, a year down the line, we hear the same problems that were heard before. I feel like I'm on a merry-go-round. I am, but with horses that are bucking pretty darn hard. So,
Mike, can you if you privatized it, could you take that PEI premium money you had set aside and put it toward larger salaries?
Well, and that's what I would like to see done. The state's always going to have to pay the 20, and we know that. But I think you need to separate the two. You shouldn't be offering a better supplemental package because you're paying lower. The package, the benefits package, should be what the benefits package is, and the salary should be decided on by the legislature, and that should have nothing to do with the benefits package at all. That's why we need to privatize this, because it becomes a political football. Bill is right. It was 2 years ago, it was $80 million. Last year or this year in special session, it was $87 million. At what point does it end when you're saying we need another $80 million to prop this up? Let's privatize this and quit worrying about it so it's not a political football every single year when we come back in here.
Mike, how much pushback will you have from the teachers if you propose a privatization?
I imagine a lot. Listen, it's a great system for them right now. They get even they're probably paying less than what the rest of the state's paying if you have private insurance. They're still paying less in premiums than what everybody else is paying. The other problem with PEIA is the way it's set up. It's not set up as a risk-based insurance, and that's how you pay. Like all other insurances, it's based on tenure, how long you've been there, and where you are in the system, which makes no sense at all. What the heck's that have to do with insurance? So, we just need to scrap it all together and quit making this about politics all the time.
Is there sympathy within the legislators to do this? Have you talked to your colleagues?
I think there are a lot of them that would like to see it done. It's whether or not they have the political willpower to do it. Because there is going to be pushback from the teachers' unions, so on and so forth, to not do this. They like what they have. They don't want to have to pay more premiums. I get it. I don't want to have to pay more premiums either. But that's the reality of medical insurance in our country right now.
Joe, I think it comes back to you for these final 3.5 minutes, but anytime you're talking about health insurance coverage, it's tough to isolate it as a state issue when it's such a national issue as to how much medicine costs in this country.
Indeed. We know that the cost of medical care outpaces inflation. Even when we had high inflation, the cost associated with seeing a doctor or getting medical services was going up even faster. So we can't seem to bend the cost curve. So you have to work at the other end, and it's a vexing problem. What makes it, and while it's a national problem, what makes it particularly troublesome in West Virginia is we've got public employees and teachers that are paid less than just about any other, by comparison, any other public employee in any other state. So we feel the brunt of these sorts of increases in premiums and copays, I think much more than other states because of our pay scale. So it really becomes a vexing problem for the legislature, and I don't envy them in trying to solve this. And another thing that contributed to the shortfall that PEIA has, remember that the legislature, I think it was just last year, to solve the problem of reimbursement rates to the medical providers, mandated that there be an 80-20 split between employer and employee, and that the reimbursement rates for those medical providers be done at the rate of 110%. So to comply with that, PEIA is shelling out a lot of money. And now they've got this shortfall, and here we are. And Mike's right. The freezing of this by the governor has made this much more prominent of a problem than it was or should have been. So the bottom line is the state has to deal with people who are not paid all that great and now faced with these kinds of expenses.
On the other hand, you got 6 or 7 years of your premiums not keeping up with inflation, which was a good thing for 6 or 7 years, but at some point you got to pay that back, and that's what's happening now. So you can look at it two ways. Oh, my jump is huge, or hey, for 6 years I didn't have to pay a jump.
And also, Rob, during those 6-7 years, we had a period of very high inflation.
Yeah. And that's probably the reason why there's so much early voting right now.
And PEIA was sort of like a Cadillac insurance, except for how they paid. Joe mentions that they're mandated now to pay that 100%, 110%. I think it's 100%. 110% of what either Medicaid or Medicare pays.
Yes,
that's right.
It's not the full boat, but that was because providers were starting to say we are not going to take PEIA anymore. We're done with it. You're not paying us enough. So yeah, it was a Cadillac plan for those who had it. But if you can't get services, then what good is it?
It's not worth anything. From our own health insurance premiums, and my wife's a Fed, about 4 or 5 years ago, we switched out of the plan we had because the premiums were becoming 4 digits per paycheck. So we switched to one that was about half of that, and here we are 4 or 5 years later, and it's right back where we switched out of. Only college tuition and health insurance costs exceed the rate of inflation, and they get away with it too, and there doesn't seem to be any way around it.
Probably auto insurance too.
Lately, huh?
Yeah, oh yeah.
My auto insurance is jacking up too.
Goes to the plaintiff's lawyers.
Yeah, yeah. It might have something to do with the profits of outfits like State Farm, I think.
Let me check and see if we have any State Farm advertisers on right now. They do a great job there. 9 o'clock.
Just giving a generic example.
This is Talk Radio, WRI Martinsburg and TV10. The Admiral is on the clock next. Issue number 2, and for that, the Admiral, Bill Stubblefield.
Rob, Joe mentioned an issue on the statewide level, and I think that probably Larry and Mike will talk on the national level. I'm going to go very local, and that is the Patricia Rucker John Doyle race. They've had several forums, at least 3 forums, and if you did not attend a forum, I'm sure you've heard a lot about them because they received quite a bit of publicity. My question is, out of these forums, out of the visibility, who won the discussions between Doyle and Rucker?
Yeah, and by the way, if you're not aware of those forums, just so you know, the uniqueness of these forums was that there was no moderator.
2 of the 3, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the other one, of course, was our one on October the 22nd.
Yeah.
So let's start first with Larry Schultz here. Larry?
Yeah, from the parts of it that I saw, I thought John Doyle was a very vigorous candidate. He attacked the issues. I don't have a feel for exactly who won it, but I think John showed that he's certainly capable of being a West Virginia senator, and I thought he did a pretty good job. For someone who's running for the office against an incumbent, the standards are different. The incumbent, you vote on what they've done. The person coming in, you vote on what they hope, what you hope they can do. And so it's not an even thing when you have these debates, I don't think, when there's a difference between the candidates, like one of them's in office and the other one isn't. So I don't know for sure who won the debate. I was very impressed with the way John Doyle handled himself.
Mr. Carl.
Well, I want to modify somewhat the impact of Mr. Schultz's statement. John Doyle has great experience as a candidate for legislative office, and so I wouldn't be surprised if he did well functionally. Of course, I have a very deep bias against him and in favor of Rucker on substantive politics, but let's don't paint John Doyle as a rookie by any means.
Mr. Height.
I think this is an interesting race. I think who won? I think the winners were the people that have seen that you can have a clean campaign without disparaging remarks of your opponent. And I think both of them showed the class that they are. Now, for those people who are already on the right, they're still on the right. They're going to vote for Rucker. If those people that were on the left are going to vote for John. The people that were on the fence, I don't know how much these debates really swayed them one way or the other. I am going to push back on Larry a little bit. Most of the time you're correct. When there's an incumbent, they have a record to run on. But John Doyle was a legislator for many, many years. He has a record. And you can go back and see how he's voted on the issues and policy. And that's the interesting thing about that race and the presidential race, this is one of the first times in my lifetime I can remember where you have someone from a sitting administration, the presumptive incumbent in Harris, and somebody who has been president and had an administration previously. Both of them have a record. You can go back and look and see what their policies were. Forget all the rhetoric that's going on right now. If you're looking at Harris, it's going to be much like it has been for the past 3.5, 4 years. If you vote for Trump, it's going to be much like it was the 4 years previous to that. So that's what most people need to look at, I think, instead of what they say they're going to do. Look at what they have done. And the same thing with Rucker and Doyle.
Mr. Ferretti.
Well, first of all, I applaud both candidates, too, with the way they've conducted themselves. And from the perspective that I have with John Doyle, he clearly exhibits extensive institutional knowledge, born of experience, of course, because he's been in Charleston plenty of times, serving as a representative for the Eastern Panhandle. And I think he acquitted himself well, and in a state that is increasingly becoming red, he didn't come across as some out of line or out of bounds progressive that was going to be offensive to a lot of the voters in the Eastern Panhandle. So I think he accomplished what he needed to as a candidate, except for one thing. And I hesitate to say this because John Doyle has run successfully for office plenty of times, and I've done it exactly 0 times. But my armchair analysis is that to beat an incumbent, you have to give people a reason to get rid of the incumbent. And when I listened to the candidates forum, I heard a lot of, I agree with her and she agrees with him. And it was a lot of kumbaya. And I don't know that that's going to accomplish what John Doyle needed to, which was to strike a real difference that resonated with the people in the Eastern Panhandle and in that particular district. So I don't know that he accomplished what he needed to in terms of giving people a reason to not vote the incumbent back in. And Patricia Rucker has shown herself to be a good politician, and I think she's become even more powerful politically just here in the past year or two. She's going to be tough to beat, and I don't know that John accomplished what he needed to do that.
That's a great point, Joe, and I wonder how many people agree with you here on the panel about that. I'm not sure if you all had a chance to watch that forum or not, but you do have to strike a strong contrast between you and the person who's in office if you're trying to unseat that person. And I thought that they did that on the edges, politely, but I don't know that they drew those lines strongly. Bill, what did you think?
I agree with Joe, but my question was, I think, designed for another purpose. I felt there were 4 winners in this Rutger-Doyle series of debates. One was a system, and the system demonstrated that we could have a campaign without all negativity. We could have a campaign that stressed the positives and gave credit to the other party when it was appropriate. Admittedly, they did not go for the juggler, and you might have had to do that if your sole purpose was to win the election. And I think they both wanted to win the election, but they also had a more embedded reason. They wanted to demonstrate that the system could work as it used to work as opposed to the way it is right now. I think the second winner were the people themselves. I've heard you and Rob, you and I have commented that after the debate on WRNR the other day, we felt good. We could have listened to them go for another hour or so. We just came away feeling good. We learned something. Maybe we didn't learn as much that may sway us one way or the other as we might have, but we felt that we learned something, and we learned it in a very gentle sort of way. And those other 2 debates where they did not have a moderator, it's my sense that people came away feeling the same way. I heard so many people say they left the debates just feeling good. The third and fourth winner, I think, were the candidates themselves. Both went into this race with being cast as a hardcore partisan. And Patricia Rutger were so far to the right, you could not vote for unless you were in that camp. The very same thing with John Doyle, very much of a progressive. Remember, even though John would argue against the term progressive, and neither one of them walked away from this definition that they are labeled. But what they did, I thought, was to make their positions much more acceptable. I listened to Patricia Rutger, and even though she's farther to the right than I am, I saw some very good logic in what she was saying. The very same thing with John Doyle. I thought John made some very good points. Both of them made their positions a lot more acceptable, a lot more more understandable than they did before. So I thought between the system, the people, and the candidates themselves, it was a grand slam, and I think we all benefited.
You know, I agree with a lot of what you said. I'm wondering though, when this is all said and done and the votes are all counted, if people don't point to the loser and say that was not a winning strategy, whichever side loses, and will say if they had been more aggressive in their campaign, they would have stood a better chance. But they didn't want to be aggressive. They didn't want to attack their opponent on the issues. So I'm wondering if, while it may have worked and we may like what we saw in this campaign, there are going to be people that say, you know, Doyle, Rucker, whoever, you lost because you didn't go after your opponent. And you should have had a more aggressive campaign. And you can't win with that style of government today.
You may well be right, Mike, but we've all seen after a particular negative campaign, we said that candidate lost because they went too negative. In fact, we had that recently with the governor's campaign. One of the candidates went negative very quickly. He lost, and he was accused after the fact of being too negative, too extreme, way too early. So you can have that argument both ways.
Well, I think there's a way that you can still do both without making it personal, and one of those is on education. Each candidate could look at the other one who has a voting record on education. In fact, Senator Rucker was the chair of the Education Committee in the Senate for a while. And if you're John Doyle and you're trying to point out that you're a strong supporter of public education, and John talked about his differences with Senator Rucker, but he didn't get, I think, specific on bills or language, and I think Patricia could have done the same. They may have done that in the forums that they did. I didn't get a chance to watch those forums so much as the one that we did, of course. We're sitting there front row center for those. And maybe that's kind of what Joe's referring to in his previous comment a moment ago. But that hour that we spent with them was an enjoyable hour, and it was above the level of national politics. And I'm listening this morning, and you know, anytime Donald Trump opens his mouth about a candidate who's opposing him, it's a personal insult fest. And then I hear Tim Walz this morning in a quote about McDonald saying that he looked with his orange hair, he looks like Ronald McDonald, talking about Trump. And I'm thinking back just from when I was a kid watching presidential debates and elections, and the story was, oh, you know, he's going to allow the Russians to take over the country, or, you know, he's going to get us into nuclear war. You were talking about serious stuff. You weren't saying, you know, Ronald Reagan looks too old to be president. They might have caught up his age, but they didn't make, you know, the political debates didn't have anything to do with his personal appearance. You know, no one said, you know, Nixon has a receding hairline. He looks terrible. It wasn't that. You know, you might have called him Tricky Dicky or whatever, but you weren't talking about their personal appearances. And this is what we've devolved to at the national level on politics with our presidential campaigns. Is this really what we want in a presidential campaign, making fun of the other person and how they look? Is that really what it comes down to now? Because it does.
That's kind of the theme of my question.
Yeah.
We're seeing two major contrasts. We'll never bring the national campaign to what we saw with the Rutger Doyle, but hopefully we'll back off with some of the extreme verbiage or some extreme characterization that we're seeing now.
Well, you can be aggressive without being demeaning. Yeah. And I think that's probably where one of these candidates will say, you know, I could have been more aggressive in talking about policy. And I think it's okay to be aggressive and point out differences in policy. But Rob's right. Yeah. We need to get away from personal attacks, family and appearances and things like that. That's what people are sick of.
Exactly.
On to issue number 3, and for that, the man who just spoke, Michael Haidt.
Mine is, we talked a little bit earlier in the show about this, and mine is about early voting. And the early voting seems to be breaking records, and not just here in West Virginia, but nationwide it seems to be breaking records. So my question is, does this benefit Harris or Trump in the current presidential race?
Early voting, Harris or Trump? Joe, let's go to you first on the phone.
My theory is it's impossible to say because I think we can anticipate that the popularity, the convenience of voting early is going to skew the numbers. I don't know how they're going to skew in terms of Democrat versus Republican, but I do know that people are increasingly adopting the practice of getting out and voting early. It just makes sense that we have that ability to do that. And I see now that a lot of people are becoming adopters of that practice. So I don't know. I just think we're going to need a lot more data over the years to figure out if there is a party difference, if there is some advantage in who's voting early. We know traditionally the Democrats were the early adopters of it, and Republicans are now coming aboard. But I don't know that that signifies strength to either one of these candidates because we don't have enough information yet to discern what this means in terms of projecting a winner. And I think this is true for Berkeley County, too. While we are buoyed by the numbers of people turning out early to vote, I'm going to predict that the overall turnout percentage of eligible voters in Berkeley County will not be a whole lot different than it has been in prior elections, unfortunately. And I think that's true because we just don't have a lot of sexy races on a statewide level that's going to compel people to come to the polls. So, and everybody knows it's baked in that Trump's going to win the state. So I think the enthusiasm you're seeing nationally and locally is that it's just a great option to vote early. I don't know what it means.
Mr. Stubblefield.
Yeah, there's no saying that the generals always fighting the last war. I think we're seeing the same thing here. We're interpreting these numbers based upon what we saw in 2020 and to some degree in 2016. There is no question that there is a larger percent of Republicans turning out than they did in 2020. Everything shows that. And the Republicans in several states, as Holstein mentioned earlier, are comparable, relatively speaking, to that of the Democrats. That's good. But what it does not show us are the absolute numbers. Are there, in absolute numbers, more Republicans turning out than Democrats, or is it still proportional in terms of Democrats? We don't know the absolute numbers. So I think we're making a mistake of trying to read too much into these early turnouts, and I kind of echo what Joe says. Let's wait till we see the total number of votes at the end to see what difference it made. But we are changing our attitudes, more so with the Republicans. Republicans, due to being very, very hesitant to vote early in 2020, have now embraced the idea, and they're getting out vote early now.
Michael Carl.
Well, I agree with those points in general. The growth of what appears to be more Republicans than in the past voting early still doesn't mean that they displace election day Republican votes. So in the actual polls about voting, I don't think ask are you voting early or not. So I think there's a distinction between the political partisan pattern of early voting and the ultimate outcome of the election because of that. I can't imagine that just because it appears that Republicans are voting earlier more than they used to, that means that those are displacing election day Republican votes.
Mr. Schultz.
Yes, I agree with a lot of what's been said. It is too early to tell what these numbers mean. We also don't have a presidential candidate this time, unlike last time, who was telling everybody not to vote early. We did have that last time, and a lot of those people who eventually voted for him didn't vote early because he told them not to. Somebody finally got to him and made him understand that that was killing him. And so he quieted that down, Mr. Trump did. But, the other thing is, I was fascinated by the data about the folks over 65 dominating a lot of the early voting. But when you think about that as someone over 65, even if you're retired, your days aren't as positive as a 19-year-old person's days are, in the sense of I might have something come up that'll make it impossible for me to go. My body will break down. My car will break down. You've lived a whole life of problems, and they're getting worse in some ways. Yeah. And so you say, hey, why don't we just knock this out early? As soon as I can do it, in fact.
I could die before election day.
That raises a question. What if you vote early and die before the election?
I still don't know the answer.
Count?
Your vote counts.
Does it?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know.
Yeah.
No, it's a cast vote, so.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting. I'm sure.
I wondered about that every time I've early voted in my whole life. What if I get hit by a car on the way back? What am I going to do?
Still counts.
Yeah.
Comes back to you, Michael Haidt.
So I think this does tell a story. I think people are usually creatures of habit, and if you normally voted early, you still vote early. If you've normally voted on election day, you probably continue to do that. I think there are going to be some that may switch and start voting early. But if you're on Team Red, if you're a Republican, I think these early indications of early voting being increased is a positive sign. That Republicans have always said, don't worry about the early votes. We typically come in on election day. But this early voting, I think, is a positive indication for the Republicans. And I also have seen polls that indicate an uptick of positive views on Donald Trump than he has had in the past, but from minorities in particular. So while he's still under 50% with those minorities, where he used to be at 15 or 20, those numbers are increasing, and those could have been some of those that were early voters before who are now going to the polls in a positive reflection for Trump. So I think this is good for him.
Mike, we're that sweet part of the campaign that both sides can find reason to be optimistic.
Well, and should. I mean,
should.
Yeah.
Should,
yeah. You gotta portray positive attitude right now.
Well, Josh Holstein in the first segment brought up the point, a vote in the bank is better than one that's conditional on election day. And so no matter what, that's a good thing, regardless of the party. You got votes in the bank come election day because, as Larry said, you get older, you're used to the fact that things happen that make your goal of being somewhere on a particular day impossible.
It's sort of like what Mike was talking about. Is sort of like guys sitting around talking on Sunday night before the first day of deer season. Everybody's going to get a big one then.
Yeah.
But, it can rain. You can wake up with a cold. Who knows?
Yeah.
So
I'm just telling
people just move up.
I issue the same invitation to all the deer hunters out there. Rather than sitting out in the cold and the rain, just meet me at my house at 4 a.m. We'll drive in together, get plenty of deer. I'll tell you that right now.
There is an early doe season going on right now because we're overpopulated.
I hit one on the road the other day that someone else had hit before me. Didn't mean to. It was in the way. Hang in there, and thank you, Michael Haidt. Larry Schultz, you're on the clock for issue number 4 when we get back from the break here. Marion Ross, she was the mom on Happy Days. Born this day, 1928. This song was the theme song to Happy Days, the first year they went on the air. Roger Miller passed away this date, 1992, King of the Road. With issue number 4, Mr. Larry Schultz.
Yes, John Kelly, Trump's longest-serving chief of staff, a retired 4-star general, and a Gold Star father, flatly says Donald Trump is a fascist who loved Hitler's generals. Name someone more honorable than John Kelly, who spent more time with Trump and who says he's not a fascist.
So we're going to just throw out one name?
It's a quiz.
So
It's a quiz.
Well,
it's going to be a quick segment here.
if you've got 5, go ahead.
You want to discuss, just for the sake of carrying a 10-minute discussion here,
Sure.
do you want to discuss the veracity and how believable the statement by General Kelly is?
Well,
works
I
for you
mean,
as well?
you can go ahead and attack the credibility of a
And whether
Gold
it's
Star
accurate or
father
not?
all you'd like. Sure.
All right. Then we can go from there. Let's go to the military wing of the building first. And for that, let's start with Delegate Michael Haidt.
Well, I have a lot of respect for the man, but I feel like people who interact with Trump on a regular basis, like General Kelly did, and many other people, that he moves them the wrong way. He just rubs them the wrong way, and they, after meeting him and not working for him anymore, it becomes personal for them rather than about policy anymore. And I think they take some of his comments the wrong way. He's very bombastic with his comments, and I take him with a grain of salt. When he makes a comment like he had some appreciation or liked the way Hitler's generals, I think he's talking about the way they conducted the war, their strategy and things like that. And you can look at that. You can look at the other side and say, these were intelligent people. Even you look in the Civil War, you can look at the other generals and say, they were brilliant strategists without saying, you're in love with what they stood for. And I think that's where there's some miscommunication with how his comments are interpreted a lot of times. Now, is General Kelly a great man? I do believe he's a great man, but I think it's a personal thing for him right now. It's not so much about politics. I think there's other people in the Republican Party that feel the same way. It's about Trump and their dislike for Trump rather than the policies that he's going to bring.
Mr. Carl?
Well, as a former enlisted person in the military myself, I am totally ashamed of General Kelly, and I think he ruined his legitimate reputation as a great military leader by engaging in this personality trashing of Trump. It has nothing to do with what matters and the national security that he had a distinguished career in promoting, but he ruined it all with this statement as far as I'm concerned.
Mr. Stubblefield.
Mike Carl and I agree on some things, disagree on many things. However, I don't think I've ever heard anything you've said, Mike, that I disagree more than that particular statement. General Kelly, when he stepped down as chief of staff, Trump said he was one of the most honorable persons ever served with, and that he was the best chief of staff that in the history of the United States. So words to that effect. So he praised Kelly a great deal. If Kelly was by himself on this island by himself, it'd be one thing, but he's not. The first Secretary of State, the chairman of Exxon, and I've forgotten the gentleman's name right now.
Rex Tillerson.
Tillerson, thank you. Milley, Epson, Secretary of Defense, Bolton. The list goes on and on and on of folks that serve very closely with Trump in his administration. They've all come out and said basically the same thing. Now, and then Trump has been very consistent with each one of them, has then accused them of being garbage and not worthy of any recognition whatsoever. This number of people don't change overnight, and the reputation they built up just because they view they're being very honest in their assessment. I think, and I've been apologetic for him, right, is really stretching it. I think a more realistic question that Larry could have asked was, is it going to make a difference? Is this the October bombshell that we have seen in times past? I think it could be, except I think at this point in time, people are so locked in, I don't think it's going to make any difference at all. In any other race, any other time, I think it would have been the October surprise.
Yeah.
Thank you. But I really don't think it's going to make any difference this time.
Joe Ferretti.
Well, to Mike Carl, I dare say I think your comments border on wanting to shoot the messenger, which happens a lot when it comes to people critical of Trump. And Mike Height, there's a term that we're starting to hear quite often. It's called sane washing, which is you take the insanity with which Trump sometimes comports himself, and you somehow rationalize it, make it sane. When the discussion referencing the Nazi generals was about the fact that they were loyal to one man, that they would follow his dictates and not take an oath to the Constitution, but take an oath to the president. That's what John Kelly was talking about. And that's the fear that a lot of people have about another Trump presidency. I think some of these folks are coming forward, and I think they've made this explicit. These folks that Bill Stubblefield mentioned, like Bolton and Esper, the defense secretary, and Milley and Kelly, and on and on. They're coming forward because they know that their ilk, the people like them, are not going to be in this second administration. There's not going to be some of these guardrails that kept Trump from doing crazy stuff, like ordering the National Guard to shoot people in the legs who were protesting over George Floyd, about pulling out of NATO, as John Bolton's book suggests Trump was ready to do, over a squabble about contributions of money, pulling out of NATO over money. Those kinds of things Trump was talked out of or was told he couldn't do. Like when the whole Justice Department was ready to resign because he was about to appoint Jeffrey Clark to write a letter that the Georgia election was soon going to be under Department of Justice investigation, when there was no basis in fact to do so. Those people kept him from doing the god-awful things that would have had this country in turmoil. And the fear is that people like John Kelly are not going to be chief of staff. They're not going to be the Secretary of the Defense or on the Joint Chiefs. And that's why these people are coming forward, because they know the dangers that could ensue if that becomes a reality. And I think, it's baked in. You can put as much stock as you want on what John Kelly has to say, whether it's a 911 call, as Kamala Harris suggested, or whether it's just a disgruntled former guy who doesn't like Trump personally. You can define it any way, but I think it's something to at least consider when you go vote.
But unfortunately, I think that's why it's not going to make a difference. Unfortunately, we've heard this song and dance before when it comes to Trump with other leaders, and you can point them out if you want. This is the same old rhetoric. I don't think it's going to make a difference at this point in the race, one way or the other. It's not going to be the October surprise because we've heard it before from other people. And that's unfortunate, because there may be some credibility to what he's saying.
I was a classmate of John Bolton, and I'm telling you that there's the difference that matters is the difference between actual performance and the record of Trump's administration versus crazy things he may have said.
Larry, comes back to you.
Yeah, just a couple of things. You can certainly admire Hitler's generals, but they did get beat like circus ponies when it was finally all said and done. And the second thing
That'd be the reason why we don't have circuses anymore.
They plotted among themselves to kill Adolf Hitler on numerous occasions.
They did.
I would love to know what part of that Donald Trump admires, because we have an honorable military in this country that I don't think would plot to kill the President of the United States, but there's no guarantees. Look, it's just the thing that if you take a person who has given some very clear messages that he's going to be a fascist, and you make him the president without any chance of re-election, then what are the guardrails on him? If the John Kellys have said, okay, I've had enough, and the other people have said, there are no guardrails on him. He's not going to care what the voters think about him. Why would he? He's not running for office again, unless he loses this time. And then perhaps we'll go through this when he's in his 80s 4 years from now. Nobody can think of anybody. I mean, I can't, off the top of my head, think of anybody more honorable than John Kelly. His service speaks for itself. And the torture it must have been for him to serve Donald Trump and to hear the suckers and losers comments and to see that he did not care about anybody but himself must have been extremely torturous for him. We can write that all down. John Kelly doesn't strike me, though, as a person who will jump on a cheap political advantage. That's not what honorable people do, and he is about as honorable a person as has been around in my lifetime.
All right, I'll do issue number 5, and for that, Michael Carl.
Here's the question. Do you agree that the January 6th ultimate outcome, which was the election of Biden, confirmed the ultimate viability of the United States constitutional system, thanks to Vice President Pence's action, Pence having been selected by Donald Trump?
All right. Any questions about that introduction, just to make sure everybody's clear on what we're looking for? If not, then we'll go right to Joe Ferretti on the phone.
Yeah, I said it, Mike, not long after it happened, that Mike Pence clearly, legally did the right thing. And I remember talking about the judge, a former Fourth Circuit judge, who counseled Mike Pence on what legally was his responsibilities as a sitting vice president in certifying a national election. And that was J. Michael Luttage, who was the judge that Mike Pence ran to say, look, I'm under a lot of pressure to do something that I don't think I can do. What legally am I required to do? And the judge counseled him correctly, fortunately for all of us. So now, the fact that Mike Pence is now an outcast, is not supporting Donald Trump and is an outcast in his own party says a lot. But I agree. Mike Pence stood up and did what was right. And fortunately, we survived as a republic. Whether those people, as borrowing from my previous comments and what other people had said, whether those people are going to be in a position to do so again if the need arises is a question that I have.
Larry?
Trump now views the selection of Mike Pence as a mistake on his part. A mistake. Now, it so happened that Trump, who knew this could happen, misjudged this person and didn't understand the integrity that he actually had. And we're all lucky that that was the case. By the way, another person that Mr. Pence relied upon was Dan Quayle, the former vice president. He spoke with Dan Quayle in the days leading up to his decision. But the notion that somehow Donald Trump should get credit for an insurrection that he caused and that he planned for, and as time goes on we'll find out more and more about that he planned for weeks with other groups of people, that somehow one guy just happened to have enough courage to say, and enough knowledge to say, oh no you don't. That was lucky for us, but I don't think Donald Trump gets any credit for that. We could have avoided the whole thing by him not doing that. So,
Mr. Height?
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Larry on this. So I don't know why Pence is an outcast now. Pence did the right thing.
You know why he's an outcast.
Well, yeah, because I'm not a big Trump supporter. I've said that many times. Don't particularly like him. And because of the system we have, because we have many people in power with integrity, that our system does work. It prevents the takeover of somebody who may be a little more dictatorial. It prevents them from doing that. Our system, it proves our system works. Whether you like it or not, whether you like the outcome or not, our system works. And in the end, there was a transition of power, peaceful transition of power. So I think Pence did the right thing.
William.
Yeah, I don't think the question was, did Pence do the right thing? The question that Mike asked was continued long-term viability of the U.S. constitutional system. And that was continued from Mike Pence. We have a vice president now a candidate running with Trump that has said that Pence did the wrong thing. He should not have taken the action he did. So if we go back to Mike's question, long-term viability, is that going to continue 8 years down the road if we do not have a Mike Pence show the courage that he did? If we have a Vance, J.P. Vance, that has said that Pence did the wrong thing? To me, that's a real question. Can we continue the long-term viability without someone of Mike Pence's courage or conviction?
Back to you, Mr. Carl.
Well, I totally disagree and challenge the legitimacy of the contention that the vice presidential candidate said that was the wrong thing. He said that. Several times. That's what you say. I don't accept that as true, that he said that or believes it. But never. The point is the system worked, as Mike Height said. The system worked, and it will continue to work, and that's what counts.
Well, it worked thanks to Mike Pence. And now you and I have a question, what J.B. Vance's view. He has said it numerous times that he felt that Pence made the wrong decision.
Well, if you can prove to me that he said that, then I'm going to vote against Trump in the election.
Yeah, I can find that, Mike.
Okay.
That's very easy to find.
Because he went to the same law school, that I did. And
we're well aware.
And I'm very supportive of him. And if he said that Pence was wrong, I mean, the system worked, and the people that Pence consulted with, were sort of a variety, but the system worked. That's the bottom line, and the system is continuing. And it doesn't matter who Donald Trump is president or not.
So if you vote against Trump, does that mean you'd be voting for Harris?
I'll probably vote. Oh, no. I'd vote no. In fact, if it's a third-party candidate, I'd wonder who.
He's going to write in Jim Justice.
Well, that would be interesting for Mike Carl because, as we know, he's not a big Jim Justice fan.
Right.
Yeah. If we could put him in the presidential race, which obviously he'd lose, and take him out of the Senate race, that'd be great.
But I wonder also if Pence had decided not to certify the outcome, would the Republican senators have turned on him? Would the system still have worked because Congress would have said, whoa, wait a minute, no.
The Democrats would have taken it to the Supreme Court, and
Yes.
they would have reversed the denial of the election of Biden.
Absolutely. So the
Without
system
a
still
doubt.
would have
That's
worked.
the system,
Yeah.
the whole system.
Well, we had a system where the president couldn't hire SEAL Team 6 to go after his political enemies, and that's kind of that same Supreme Court you're talking about kind of put a limp in that. So all of this stuff, it's great that it held once, but trying it over and over again, that's not my idea of a good idea. That's not my concept of a plan.
Every time you push the envelope gets a little bit more expanded. And then what used to be unusual or abnormal becomes closer to being normal.
There's no way that the current U.S. Supreme Court would have sustained the denial of what Pence did and his vice president.
You have a lot of faith in that Supreme Court that a lot of other Americans don't have, Mike.
And I'm one of them.
It's at the heart of the greatness of America.
It is, but there are a lot of people who don't feel like that is.
Well, I don't
holding.
agree with every decision they make,
Mm-hmm.
but the system that there's 9 of them, and the kind of quality of people that, and the diversity, of political backgrounds and everything else in that court, and their competence and their love and belief in the system and the Constitution is awesome, and I have totally comfortable. And anybody that worries about it, that's their right, but they're wrong as they can be.
Well, I appreciate your faith in the system. I love your faith in the system, and I hope you're correct. But that has become as political a position as anything else in this country right now. The only thing short of it is that they're not elected; they're appointed for life.
I agree.
Their recent decisions have also damaged that very faith on the part of a lot of people. The immunity decision is simply insane.
We have final thoughts coming up. You get 8 seconds apiece as usual. Mike Carl has promised that his won't be about sports this time. It's going to be interesting to hear what that's going to be.
I can give you.
Stay where you are. By the way, I should point out Nancy Cartwright, the voice of Bart Simpson, born this date, 1957. Simpson's theme takes us out. Final thoughts. We start with Joe Ferretti on the phone. Joe, go.
A lot of people down on WVU football, but the combined records of teams that have beat WVU is 26-1.
Mr. Schultz.
They're eating the dogs. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people who live there.
Mr. Stubblefield.
We have a rare treat tonight watching the first and second ranked team in the state play.
Mr. Carl.
To whomever illegally placed a John Doyle campaign sign in my front yard, be advised it's gone.
Mr. Height.
I want that sign back.
Dave Ramsey's show's coming up next.
Torn up.
This
had to
is
make
Talk
room for the
Radio.
Kamala Harris
WRNR
sign.
Martinsburg and TV 10. We'll talk again in 70 short hours.
Clock some